The knock came at midnight. 3 hard raps on the wood of the door, and Cole Hadley was already awake, had been awake for some time in the particular way of men who sleep lightly not from vigilance but from habit, from the long-trained expectation that peace will not hold. He rose without lighting a lamp. He stood a moment in the dark of the front room, listening to the wind move through the scrub beyond the window, and then the knock came again, not frantic, not pleading, just insistent, the knock of someone who had made a decision and was holding to it. He opened the door. She was perhaps 9 years old and barefoot on the cold boards of the porch, her dark hair loose around her face, wearing a dress that had been washed so many times the print had gone nearly white. She looked up at him without stepping back, which he noticed. She had expected him to be large, and she had come anyway. "My mom needs help," she said. Her English was careful, each word set down like something she had practiced. "She fell in the arroyo." Cole looked past her into the dark. The land was moon-washed and still, the arroyo a black crease maybe half a mile east, and he thought about how far she had walked in the cold and the dark to knock on his door, a white man's door, the only door out here, which meant she had known about him and had decided, and the deciding must have cost something. He thought about that for a moment, about what kind of desperation calculates its risks and still walks barefoot to a stranger. He had lived on the edge of Mescalero land for 3 years and kept mostly to himself, which was a kind of agreement both sides had honored without discussion. He had not thought that anyone here needed him. He had not thought about being needed at all. "Wait," he said. He went back inside and lit every lamp he owned, the 2 on the mantel, the one by the window, the old one from the kitchen that he hadn't used in weeks. And he did it without thinking about it, the way you do a thing that is simply right. And when he came back to the door with his coat and his medicine bag, the girl was standing in the spill of light from the windows and her eyes were wide and still. "You lit up the whole house," she said. He looked back at it. He supposed he had. "So you could see where to come back to," he said, and she looked at him for a moment and then turned and walked off the porch into the dark, and he followed. The woman was lying against the east bank of the arroyo, where the ground was still damp from the last rain, and her breathing when Cole knelt beside her was the shallow, labored breathing of someone who has used everything up. Her hand was still closed around a root she had pulled before she fell, some medicinal thing, he guessed, from the way it had been cut. And the sight of that closed hand, that small determined errand still held even in collapse, told him something about her that he did not yet have the words for. The girl, she told him her name was Lului, which meant singing bird, though she said this without sentiment, as information knelt on the other side of her mother and held the lantern with both hands, keeping it steady, which she did with great seriousness and did not waver from even when Cole moved around her. He noticed that. The woman's name was Nasha. He knew this because Lului said it once quietly, while he checked her breathing, "Nasha, I brought help." And the word held something in it that he understood to be both her mother's name and everything she had bargained on tonight. She was younger than he had expected. He registered this when he lifted her, the way you register things when your hands are already doing the work your mind hasn't caught up to. She was perhaps 30, perhaps less, slight and capable-looking even in her stillness, and the calluses on her hands were the calluses of specific labor, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you are doing and doing it a long time. The dress she wore had been mended at the hem with a different thread, close, careful stitches, and he looked at those stitches while he carried her and thought about the kind of attention that mends things precisely, that does not rush the needle. Lului walked beside him with the lantern and did not speak. The prairie grass bent in the night wind and the stars were very clear, and the light from his house was visible the whole way back, burning yellow in all its windows, more light than one man had any cause to make. He was perhaps 100 yards from the door when Nasha opened her eyes. She looked at him directly, not with fear, not with gratitude, simply with the clear attention of someone taking stock, and he looked back, and neither of them spoke, and then she closed her eyes again. But she had not flinched. He found that he kept thinking about that after. The way a person can look at the world and not flinch, even when the world is a stranger carrying them through the dark. He broke the fever by dawn. It was not dramatic work, cool water, the herbs from his bag, the long, ordinary patience of sitting beside someone through the difficult hours. And Louis fell asleep on the floor near the stove sometime around 3 in the morning, wrapped in the horse blanket he kept by the door, her face in sleep losing its careful adult quality and becoming simply the face of a child who has done a very hard thing and can rest now. Nasha woke when the light changed, that particular shift from blue-gray to the first pale gold that happens so briefly you can miss it if you are not looking. Cole was at the kitchen table with coffee he had stopped tasting 2 hours ago, and he heard her breathing change before he heard her move, and he stayed where he was. She came to the table and sat across from him and folded her hands on the wood and looked at him. Her face was still drawn from the fever, but her eyes were clear, and they were the kind of eyes that have been paying attention for a long time. There was something behind them that was not so much suspicion as a careful, thorough knowing of the way things generally go. "I'm Cole Hadley," he said. "I know," she said. Louis chose well. He set a cup of coffee in front of her and she took it with both hands around it, and he understood from the particular way she did this. Not a gesture of comfort but of deliberate acceptance, a woman who does not take things lightly taking this, that it was not a small thing. He did not name what he understood. He simply saw it. They talked, as the morning came on, in the halting way of people who do not share a complete language but share enough, who fill the gaps with gesture and with the quality of their attention, and she told him about the route she had gone for, which was for Louis's cough, and she said this plainly, without explanation or apology. And he thought about what it is to sit across from a woman who has survived something large and quiet, and does not speak of it directly, who carries it the way the land carries its history, not as a story told but as the shape of the ground itself, the thing that determines where the water runs. He had known men who had survived great difficulty and wore it loudly, who needed you to see the weight of what they bore. She was not like that. She moved her hands while she talked, small, precise movements, and he watched her hands the way you watch something you are trying to understand, not to possess the understanding, but simply because the looking seems right, seems like what you are supposed to do with the time you have been given. Outside, the morning was making itself known in the slow, deliberate way of high desert mornings, the light coming up pale gold over the ridge, the horses moving in the corral, the ordinary world assembling itself from the dark. "You should sleep," he said. She looked at Louis on the floor, still deeply under, and something in her face settled. "A little," she said, and she went back to the cot he had made up and lay down and was asleep in moments, the way people sleep when they have finally come to the end of what they could carry alone. Cole sat at the table with his cold coffee and looked at the light coming through the window and thought about nothing in particular, which was perhaps the same as thinking about everything. She said she should leave by mid-morning. The sky, however, had other ideas. A wind came up from the north around 9, bringing with it a low, bruised mass of cloud, and the temperature dropped in the way it does out here, not gradually but all at once, as though the cold had simply decided, and Nasha stood on the porch and looked at the sky with the expressionless attention of someone who reads weather the way other people read text, and then she came back inside. Louis seemed unsurprised. She had found Cole's small store of dried apricots and was eating them with great seriousness at the kitchen table. It was perhaps an hour later when the rider came. Cole heard him before he saw him, the particular rhythm of a horse pushed harder than it wants to go, and he went to the window and watched him come across the flat. He was a broad man on a dark horse, and he rode the way some men ride, with the horse's comfort at no part of his consideration. He stopped in the yard and did not dismount. Nasha had come to stand beside Cole at the window. He felt her go still in a specific way, not afraid, or not only afraid but braced, the stillness of someone who has been here before. "My husband's brother," she said. Her voice was level. Cole went out onto the porch. The man looked down at him from the horse with eyes that had already decided the shape of this situation. He spoke first in his own language loudly, and then in English. "The woman comes with me. This is not her place." "The woman had a fever," Cole said. "She's had it since last night. She goes when she's fit to go." "She goes now." Cole put his hands in his pockets, which was not a gesture of relaxation. "I'm not stopping her from going," he said. "I'm telling you she's been sick. You ride her hard in this weather and she'll be sick again. That's just the fact of it." The man looked past him at the door, and Cole did not turn around, but he knew Nasha was standing there. And he knew the man was looking for some sign of what had happened here, some evidence to build a story on. "She comes," the man said again. But the sureness had shifted in it, become something he was maintaining rather than something he simply had, and Cole noticed that. "When she's ready," Cole said. There was a long moment during which the wind moved the dry grass and the horses shifted, and no one spoke. Then the man turned his horse and rode back the way he had come, and Cole watched him go until he was small against the flat and then gone. He went back inside. Nasha was at the window now. She stood with her arms at her sides and looked out at the land the rider had crossed, and she looked at it for a long time, not watching for him to return, he thought, but something else, something more inward, as though the land were a question she was answering. He watched her from the doorway and noticed the set of her shoulders, which was the set of someone who has just understood something she did not know she needed to understand. Lilui came and stood beside her and took her hand without asking, and Nasha looked down at her daughter, and the thing in her face was too precise and too interior to be called by any simple name. Then Lilui let go and came to Cole and took his hand briefly, with the directness of a child who decides things and acts on them, just for a moment, her small hand in his rough one. And then she let go of that too and went back to her apricots. Cole stood in the doorway of his own house and looked at the woman at the window and the child at the table and the cold light coming in. And he thought about what it is to stand between someone and harm without being asked, and whether it is the standing or the not being asked that is the greater thing. The wind moved against the glass. Nasha was still looking at the land, and the land was the land it had always been. And the light on it at this hour had a quality he did not have a word for, something between silver and gold, something that happened only in this weather on this ground, when the clouds were this particular shade of bruised, and the grass was this particular shade of pale. And she was looking at it the way you look at something that belongs to you in some way that no one has given you and no one can take. He watched her look at it. That was all, that was enough.